English minor, Brazilian, and yeah, I work for CIE.
I'm Jasmine Campbell, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a proud Haitian Puerto Rican, and my day job, I serve as Director of Equity and Inclusion for the town of Danvers, which is out in the North Shore.
I'm Ariana Woodley. I'm a 17 and 19 graduate. Ended up doing my second degree here, loved it. Also was a member of the Women's Lacrosse team. For my day job now, I'm an underwriter at John Hancock. So excited to be here and get started.
Thank you guys for sharing. I just wanted to start with the question: how do you define the term Afro-Latinidad?
I can go ahead and start that one off. I think for me, I really just break it down to basics. Like, I'm Hispanic and also African American, and I consider myself both. And I actually feel like more often than not these days, I find myself like explain that to people. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but it's almost like either a surprise or like oh wow, really? Which to me, I'm happy and proud to kind of explain that. But I definitely think it's the understanding of being Hispanic, but also understanding my African descent and where that comes from within my Hispanic culture as well. So.
Yeah, a big word that you said for me was African descent. Because like the term for me is not even like that deep. Like, it's pretty simple, just Latino and then Black. Like, that's pretty much just it. And then I feel like people kind of make me choose, like, no, you're either one or the other, you're either Black or you're Latino. I'm like, well, why can't I just be a Black Brazilian? That's what I am.
I think I'm somewhere in the same realm. I think I would love for us to start thinking about Blackness, borrowing from queer communities as a spectrum, and Afro-Latinidad or Afro-Latinx is somewhere within that spectrum, and it's an umbrella term. I see it used in different ways. I think even here it's used in different ways, but as an umbrella term for some combination, whether you're Black and Latinx or you're a Black Latinx, because those are separate, right? Being mixed is different than having a race that sometimes intersects with ethnicity. But yeah, similarly, it's just this umbrella term for a beautiful combination of being geographically from Latin America, but really representing that African ancestry.
When was the first time you guys identify yourself as Afro-Latina? I can speak for myself. Being Haitian, growing up, that was not part of the community. It's like, you're Haitian, that's it. But I also have roots from Cuba. So I'll be like, oh, like I'm Cuban, and always finding myself to explain to people. The first thing I'll use is, oh, I'm like Afro-Latina because I'm Cuban. And then I remember I was like, wait, Haitians are part of the community. And I'm like, no, I'm Afro-Latina because I'm Haitian. So.
For me, I feel like always, just because, like on my mom's side of the family, they would be white. Like, they always called me like preto, which means Black. It was like an endearing term, I guess. And then on my dad's side, just like around town in Brazil, one of his nicknames is Negão, which means big Black man, and mine is Neguinho, which means little Black boy. So just like hearing these buzzwords, I think I always understood that I was Black. And I think as I got older, as like people tried to identify me, I think I went through a little bit of identity crisis, especially from like 4th to 5th grade. I was just like, nah, I'm not Black, I'm just Latino. And that happened again in the beginning of high school. But this idea always was presented to me just because of like how my family looks and how people, even like the names that they call us.
I don't know, I guess for me, I feel like I'm still I like the word you use, like the identity crisis. I feel like I still face that sometimes. Like I still feel like I don't know, like obviously my mom's from Honduras and my dad's honestly a mix too. He's Portuguese and my grandma's from Louisiana, so I'm kind of all over. But I feel like with me, or as a female, it's like more, I guess it was kind of middle schoolish, where it was like the straight hair phase for me, where I was always, my mom would be like, you don't want to wear curly hair? Like, why don't you want to wear curly hair? And I'm like, no, like, I want my hair straight. I want to be like all these other girls that I'm going to school with. She's like, you got to remember like where you came from and to be proud of like where you came from. So if you want your hair straight, all right, we'll put the relaxer. Like I did the whole thing. And then I think once I got to college, I think like my sophomore year, I was like, all right, I'm gonna kind of like go natural. Like I'm just gonna let it flow. And I think that's when I really started to appreciate and understand those words that my mom used to say to me. I'm just like, remember where you came from and kind of those natural roots. Because I also found the groups actually here on campus, like there was like the Latinx club, there was BSO, like there was just different things that I was involved in, where I started to feel more appreciated and appreciate my culture and kind of like how I was raised and the different things like my hair, wearing my hair in braids and all that stuff. So I would say I'm still kind of figuring it out day to day, but definitely like somewhere around like college between that and now.
I feel like a late bloomer by comparison, but it also, I think it goes with the times. I might be a little older, probably not a little older. But I think for me, it was similarly identity crisis, also similar. I wish I could tell you it stops, but it never does. I think for me, it was getting to college and really immersing myself in the Latinx cultures that they had and still feeling like something was missing, right? Whether it was that there was Blackness missing because it wasn't discussed racially, or just Haiti being left out of the conversation and constantly being around Spanish speaking Latinx spaces. I was like, there's just something here I'm missing. And then my first existential crisis that I'm aware of, or one of the most salient ones for me, was the moment when my like white roommate's white friend is like, oh, you're Haitian, so you're Black. And she was like disgusted by it, which wigged me out. And I was like, no, no. And then she leaves the room and then a crisis ensues because I'm like, wait a minute, like my mom is Black. We've always been proud of that. We're always in multiracial spaces around our family. So what is this reaction coming out of me that's like centering white comfort and that's like distancing me from myself? And so it took me a long time, and unfortunately I have an older sister who, you know, could really offer me guidance at the time around like, yes, we are Black, this is what it means. But it continued. When I was in grad school, I started using the term mixed more because I recognized that my dad is a white Puerto Rican. He has hazel eyes. My mom is from Haiti. She's Black. So their presentation as an interracial couple is what had me like, oh, race and ethnicity, those are different. And we're not talking about this. And I think seeing more and more Haitians finally saying, oh, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latina, we like this. Now I was finally like, oh, okay, so like the Haitians are in, like we're in now, we're in. And I think that's what really pushed me to say, okay, yeah, like this language, let me take this, let me put that in my back pocket. I like that. And again, it does ebb and flow. I think I love saying Haitian Puerto Rican because it's straightforward and to the point. But I like having these options. And I also recognize, given my skin color and given the texture of my hair, that my role in that conversation is more to be like, all right, like, what are y'all thinking? For those of you who quote unquote look Black, who present that way, who have more of those features, like you steer this conversation, and I'm gonna just support whatever like you all want to do.
I want to touch upon like something you both said. First, the hair thing is real.
Real.
Traditionally, I think for like just males, identifying males, it's not something that like, at least for me, right? It's not something that I didn't like perm my hair. I just shaved it. Because if my hair grows out, it's obviously like it's got that like Afro vibe of it. So I would just shave it off, like buzz cut, because I think that felt like I was assimilating more. Because if I cut my hair with like number 2, you can't tell the texture. Another thing was one time my dad picked me up from school. This one kid was like, yo, are you Black? I'm like, nah, no, never. So yeah, for sure. Like trying to do these like small changes just to make you more or less Black in the case. It's definitely something that I had growing up for a few phases.
Yeah, trying to make other people feel comfortable, which I'm working on now still. And working in corporate America, I feel like sometimes like even I work from home, but I'll be on Zoom. Like, you know, I recently got braids. So people are like, hey, new hairstyle, huh? Like, I think there was curly the other day. And I'm like, yeah, well, I can kind of do both, you know? But it's just this constant, like you said, feeling of having to like play both roles. So like people are often like, oh, like, are you Black or like Spanish? Like what? So I'm like, you know what I mean? So every day.
I know you guys talk about like the struggles you face identifying with the community, but what is your proudest moments? Like, what makes you guys be proud to say that I am Afro-Latina?
I can share. So prior to working in local government, I was working in Latinx centers on college campuses. So I was coming from Tufts. And I had been in that field for about 4 or 5 years, and as I'm imagining it is like here, those are typically very homogenous spaces. Everyone looks like quote unquote what you think Latina people look like, and I'm part of that, right? My students came forward wanting to bridge relationships between our center and the Africana Center. They pitched doing basically like why we should celebrate Haiti event. And I'm just going through the motions as like the quote unquote adult in the room, like supporting them and putting this panel and this conversation together. And when I say like watching it even on Zoom, watching the way students were engaging, the students who might not have been Black, but were like, I didn't know how Haiti is the reason Latin America exists. Seeing the way that the Haitian students were finally like, yeah, we're in here, we're in the Latinx space, I think was a very emotional and very proud moment for me, because it was a thing that I didn't have growing up. And realizing I can now, you know, help facilitate this conversation, it made me very proud and more grounded. And one of the things I learned in that space that I was like, this could have saved me a lot of headache and heartache, but I learned that one of the articles in the Haitian Constitution says anyone who is born of Haitian descent or from Haiti is Black, like, like that's it, period. And for me, I was like, geez, I wish I was just carrying around the Constitution on me because I didn't have to explain anything. So I think that was like a more recent but extremely proud moment for me.
That's so special. I don't know, I feel like there are so many, but I think probably my most recent one was being able to be a part of a group that launched the Latinx employee resource group at my company, so at John Hancock. And in that group, they were, you know, kind of pulling together different people, and they were obviously looking for a bunch of different people from different backgrounds. But I think I was like pulled in because I'm a part of the also like one of the Black ERGs, employee resource groups at John Hancock. But they were kind of one person who knew my background because he took the time to ask. Was like, hey, they're starting this group, like you should really contribute. And I'm like, all right, like whatever. I joined the group, but they were all kind of, I think there was like Peruvian, Puerto Rican, Colombian. And when I joined, they were all kind of like, oh, well, like I'm darker skin. So they were like, well, what are you? Like what race, like, you know what I mean? Ethnicity are you? And I'm like, well, my mom's from Honduras. And they're like, oh, well, can you speak Spanish? And I think that was the first time that I kind of like felt proud to obviously explain my story and kind of like where I was from, but also I felt uncomfortable with my own people, but like I felt uncomfortable to get comfortable with them. And then we kind of did a panel kind of similar to this, where we were launching the Latinx ERG, and there was an executive in our meeting, and he was like, oh, Ariana, I didn't realize that you were Hispanic. And I was like, I went through my entire story again, but I think that I was on live camera. So I really had to like take a step back, you know, take that deep breath. But then at the end, when I was able to kind of like explain like, okay, this is where I'm from, like this is my background. And like people like you, I said it like literally on my camera, like you assume a lot about me just by my, you know, my appearance here at the company. But, you know, I'm much more than that. And kind of this is where I'm going to take it. So I think that more recently is probably one of my more prouder moments.
For me, like what makes me really proud of like that Afro-Latino heritage is just knowing that like, I feel like in general in civilization, like Black people have added so much to culture, especially in Brazil. Like even caipirinha, right? Like the traditional staple drink of Brazil was made by slaves. Like everything in terms of food, samba, carnival, all came from Black people, all came from slaves. And just like knowing that like we've added so much, we've literally like shaped this country. And just think about like what African Americans did here in America. And also kind of spreading that knowledge like here on campus, like through Art Excellence and like events that we're having. We have Capoeira in a couple weeks, teaching, you know, hey, this is like a martial arts, like this is cool, but this is how slaves taught each other how to fight. And also too, I think that just like features, like I don't have to curl my hair, like I don't have to work hard to get a tan. And I never have to get a lip injection in my life. So even though those are things I once hated, I feel like it's always shifting. And currently I'm like, you know, I'm happy that I get these natural things that are beautiful, you know, like Black features are beautiful, and I'm proud of that. So.
I love everybody, like what Jasmine said, I think for me, my proudest moment is saying I'm Afro-Latina, is I'm like, yeah, I'm Haitian, and this is half of your flags are a copy of my flag. I'm just gonna throw that one right in there. I'm just gonna cover that. A lot of you, the freedoms we went, we helped, you guys fought for your independence, so it's like knowing my history, and now I'm just like, every speech I have, I'm like, I'm a proud Afro-Latina, and I'm screaming it everywhere I can go. So like, I love hearing that. My other thing is, how did people treat you when they realize that you're Afro-Latina?
For me, I like what you said about the Haitian Constitution, because I've had people be like, prove it. What? Like, so just like by showing a picture of my parents, somehow that would explain everything. But I feel like it can kind of go either way. Like, I've definitely got like, no, you're not Black, or people trying to tell me what I am. Or they'll be like, oh, you're Black, okay, like we can relate on another level. But unfortunately, sometimes it also kind of opens a new door for like stereotypes and like slurs and, you know, just all of that, because now I'm not just seen as a Black man, I'm seen as a Black man and a Latino man. So they kind of pick and choose how they want to act because of those two identities.
I think you touched on like the intersections of gender with race and ethnicity, I think are super salient. I think, you know, as a cisgender heterosexual woman, especially men of color, that adds on to the exoticization, right? Because I have the desirable features, but then still have the culture like behind closed doors, if you will. And I think for me, it is a very gotcha moment, because I'm not always read as, I'm never really read as Haitian. And when that comes up, when that Blackness comes out, I think like I can see the shift in conversation. I can see it going from like, hey, like, cause I'm the palatable one, to like, oh, right? Or it gives people license to say things in front of me, not realizing like, what are you doing? And I even had that fairly recently, like when I was doing a consulting gig, you know, she was asking a question about the N-word, like, what do we do when, you know, two Black boys are calling each other that and we're white teachers and we need to intervene? But she used the word. And I was like, if I had darker skin, you wouldn't have dared. You just wouldn't have dared. So I think that has led to a lot of like calling in and calling out of like, just like, don't play. Just because I look like this, like, don't play. So I think it's really had to be me like centering myself and leveraging that. Because at the same time, that's me in spaces that darker skinned people can't get into. So it's a weird kind of balancing act for me constantly when it comes to the privilege of it, but still it hurts me too. You're talking about why you say this. Why are you like this? Seriously. Wait, can you repeat the question?
Of course. I was like, how do others treat you when they find out you're Afro-Latina?
I think it's a lot of, it's just a lot of explanations, I think, which I don't think we should always have to do, because sometimes you're just tired. You don't want to explain things. Like, you should just be able to say, hey, I'm this, that, and the third. Here's my family. Here's my kind of background, without having to feel like you need to back it up with this constant story. Like, I feel like I'm always like on edge, or people are always like, actually, I was on a Zoom call last week with some people. I'm in this big girl corporate space now. And this guy was like, I said that I was Hispanic. My mom was from Honduras because it was the start of Hispanic Heritage Month. So we had a speaker actually come in last week, Monday. And she's actually the first Latina in the US Air Force. So we had her in, whatever. And when I told him that I was also Hispanic, he was like, oh, hola. And I was like, and I'm like, so where do I go from here? I'm uncomfortable, but I also need to speak my truth, but I also need to remain this professional in this professional little box that I'm in, but I also need to stand up for myself and the people that are coming after me. You know what I mean? So I just feel like it's just constant explanations or constantly feeling like in the back of my head, like if I tell this person I'm Hispanic and they don't believe me and they tell me to speak Spanish or ask me why my hair's not curly hair, or I might have braids, because maybe that's something that people these days kind of think of as more of like an African thing. It's just constantly having to feel like I gotta have this story ready to go, like on edge. Yeah, and I think it's gonna open a lot of uncomfortable but good conversations for me in the coming time, now that I'm a part of this group in my white and more corporate space that I'm in. But yeah, just constant stories, ready to go.
I understand. This last week, I just told somebody, I'm like, yeah, I'm Afro-Latina. They're like, but aren't you Haitian? And I was like, well, let's go down the history. And it was just, so I get that. So what are some myths and misconception about Afro-Latina you guys feel like is out there?
I think when you said earlier that Black is a spectrum, it's not like just one thing. I think something that I've tried to explain to people that African American, the term African American doesn't apply to everybody who's Black. And even going to high school, my high school was very diverse. So there were like Black Brazilians, there were Haitians, they were Africans, and all look the same, but like segregate themselves from each other because they're like, oh, I'm Black and you're Haitian. And so like there's so much divide between people who look the same, and I really like Black is just a spectrum, and also there's not a traditional form of Black. Like Black people just really, there's different shades of it. There's so much difference, and I think it's hard to hold it to like one standard. Like if you don't fit, if your skin is not this shade, or if your hair is not this way, like you're not Black. And I think people try to, especially like with me, like I'm light skinned and people try to label me like you're either Black or you're not. So I think that's a misconception about being like an Afro-Latino, because it's like, you're not African American, it's like exactly Black.
Yeah, I would say for me, like, I guess coming back to my my grandma and my family that's in Honduras, all my cousins are like fair skin, long Black curly hair. And like when my mom and my dad met, my mom was actually the first one to marry outside of a Honduran man with her first marriage. So she married my dad, who he's Portuguese, and then my grandma's from Louisiana, so she's African American. But I think it's just, I don't even know. It's hard because I feel like it's just that light skin, curly hair, like perfect body, big booty, like I don't know, just different little things that I think people kind of, again, going back to that box that they like put people in. They're touching all these four corners, and if you're kind of like in the middle, if you're like a little bit in the side, or you have kind of a little bit of everything, it's kind of like, well, are you really? Like, are you sure? Because for me, I don't have like the perfect curly hair and all the good stuff, the light skin. So when I'm with like my mom and her side of the family, my mom's on the lighter side too. It's kind of like, oh well, what Anita? That's what they call me on that side. And even like my grandma, sometimes I got to check her too. So you can't be saying certain things nowadays. Like we're out and about, and someone can say something to you, so you got to really watch. So I appreciate that too, being able to bring that knowledge to her, because she's old school too, and coming from not being born in America, that mindset that she has, it's so old school. And I'm like, you say that to the wrong person here, and it's not, you're saying it to me now and it's offensive, but being able to educate her on that, because she also has light skin, dark long hair, and I'm like, I'm not like you, so get me out of that box. I'm trying to get out. But
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lies. There's a lot of lies by omission, I think. We've heard from both of my peers about like one of them being that we're a monolith when we're not. I also think there's a tricky relationship when it comes to mixedness. And don't get me wrong, I love me. Like I literally am mixed. I love that. I live in that. I love the ambiguity. Like I can talk about that for hours. And also there are aspects of mestizaje that are not true. Not every Puerto Rican is trigueño. I'm sorry. Like we're not all indígena. Like it's just, we're not. Especially when I think about European colonization, there are Europeans who settled in Latin America, Central and South America, that have been there for generations. These are white people. They're white. Mm-hmm. So I think the myth that just because you're Latina, you are a person of color, I think that's not true. I think that's dishonest. I think we have to have honest conversations, and I know we're like repping Haiti hard, but I love it. We have to have honest conversations about, well, why? Like, why is Haiti not part of the conversation, but Brazil gets to be. And tell me like, if anyone give me a reason that's not related to racism, I'll take you out to dinner because it doesn't make sense. There's a history there that is kept from us. We hear about Simón Bolívar liberating all these Latin American countries, but we whisper the part where he took resources from Haiti. And then when he had a seat at the metaphorical table, he denied or did not acknowledge the support he got. And we ignore the fact that they were then blacklisted and made an example out of, so that other slaves would not uprise throughout the globe at the time. So I think a lot of those myths contribute, and that Afro-Latinidad has been a good opportunity to unearth a lot of those myths. And that doesn't mean every Haitian is gonna say I'm Latina or Latine now, but at least we're opening the door for those people in ways, and then it's up to them to walk through, as opposed to saying, no, like we're just here because of y'all, but you don't get to be here. So I think that's some of the main, like, again, lies by omission, I would say.
And the Haiti thing is interesting because I think you bring up a really good point, like why does Brazil get to be included in that conversation when we're also not a Spanish speaking country? And that's something that, like, as a Brazilian, like when the term Latinx is being brought up, even sometimes I, as a Brazilian, feel kind of left out. And that's something that we had to, Linda and I came up with our club here, Latin Excellence, and it was so hard to find but it was so hard to find like, what to call it, because our minds just kept going to Spanish. And I'm like, wait, I don't even speak Spanish. Like, why are we gonna call it Latinos Unidos when I don't even speak Spanish? You know what I mean? And like, so I get the whole like Haitian thing because like I don't speak Spanish either. So sometimes like a lot of these people like Latinidad, like that's not, I don't speak Spanish. Like that's not something that like speaks to me. But it's interesting because Brazil gets the pass. I don't know why, maybe because of where it is on the map, but Haiti doesn't. But it's the same relationship of like not speaking Spanish, but we're still a fine country.
I was using in Tufts, again, borrowing from the queer communities, thank you all. But like, I was using Latinx Plus, I started using, because I was like, I'm not gonna call it Latinx. There are people who are Latina who don't like the X for linguistical reasons, not like gender essentialism, which is a different conversation. But I was like, if I say Latinx Plus, then I can write out Latin American, Caribbean, Hispanic, Spanish, anybody else missing, like, etc. Right? Like, I'm like, let's just get them all. So I was thinking about, I would love for that to take hold.
Yeah.
Right from me first.
So I want to play this quick video, and then we can just speak about the video.
I remember when I first discovered what black was, and then people kept calling people black. I remember like black, oh, he's black, oh, she's black. I'm like, black? They're not black, they're brown. They're dark brown, that don't make no sense.
Being proud of my African roots is something that I don't take lightly, and I embrace because it's part of who I am.
Nosotros queremos un mundo que decimos que tenemos un latino unidos, pero con el mismo tiempo tenemos que terminar la discriminación entre nosotros los latinos.
Estamos como estamos porque somos racistas entre nosotros mismos, entre nuestra propia gente. ¿Sabes qué? No nos apoyamos.
I always feel like I'm never Latina enough because of my skin color, because of my hair.
I would just hear my family be like, oh, don't go out with somebody that's dark skinned, que no salga con un negro. Arregla la raza.
Dark skin in the Latino community isn't considered beautiful.
We've been colonized so poorly that we want to identify with being white so much, not all of us, but many of us, that we look down on dark skin.
Tú como negro latino tienes dos problemas. Primero, eres negro, te discriminan por negro. Y segundo, eres latino y te discriminan por latino. Eso es doble minoría.
I remember when I was a kid, I looked at myself in the mirror. Yo dije, esta nariz, estos labios que tengo yo, I'm ugly. ¿Sabes que yo era? Porque yo pensaba que yo era feo.
Tuve una compañera de trabajo que me enteré que a mi espalda se expresaba de mí como mona, la mona. ¿Sabes qué es lo más triste? Que ella era una latina.
I know I always stress to my family whenever they say something like, they'll be like, Julissa, tú y eso moreno. And I'm like, we are the morenos. That's us.
Your parents are instilling in you that these European features are the most beautiful thing. The standard of beauty for them is blonde hair and blue eyes.
I think there's some colorism just across the board because we've been taught that lighter skin is beautiful.
Since light skin and fair skin is being portrayed on all platforms like TV and media and all of these things, it lets me know that that's what they perceive as beautiful.
And then you look on TV in the telenovelas, they don't look like me, ever. The only one I can remember is Celia.
Algo que me pasa muy seguido es que las personas dicen, ay, qué bonita eres para ser una negrita. Entonces, una persona negra no puede ser bonita.
Dark skin is beautiful and it has melanin in it and it doesn't age. We hate ourselves so much that we really don't understand how beautiful we are.
Que yo por mi color o por lo que tú crees, tú no me vas a parar, que yo voy a triunfar. En lo que yo voy a hacer, yo voy a triunfar.
Embrace the beauty that is you, because most people are trying to look like you. They're going to get their hair curled, they're going to get tans, they're getting injections in their butts and in their lips. They want to look like you. So don't hate you, because everybody wants to look like you.
Si había una fórmula, yo creo que ya lo habíamos arreglado. No hay ninguna fórmula. Tú como individuo tienes que enseñar a tu gente de ser orgulloso de ser lo que eres. Somos negros y debemos ser orgullosos de nuestra raza.
And it's okay to be brown and dark, and it's okay to have beautiful, big lips and features like this. It is okay. It is more than okay, actually, because the world changes and moves in different rhythms. And right now, people want to look like us.
That's what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to get you guys' reactions, and why do you think it's important to have a representative in these leadership roles?
Something that stands out for me, that video, is like when somebody was talking about like their family making fun of Black people, and she was like, yo, we are the Black people. That is something that for sure happens in my family all the time. My grandma, love her. But one time there was like this mixed kid as well over her house, and then she like came up to me and she was like, isn't that kid like just mad ugly? He has like these white and like Black features just mixed. I'm like, grandma, that's what I am. Yeah, for real. Like, grandma, like that's me. And for some reason, I think, especially in Brazil, once you're a certain shade, you can almost like turn off your Blackness by saying, I'm not Black. And I never understood that, because it's like, I feel like they think that they're gonna get ahead of me. So like, I'm separating myself from you by saying I'm not Black, even though they look very similar to me. And you're discriminating against people who essentially look like you, or at least, or if anything, just a little bit darker. And I never understood that. And that's something that's always coming up in my family. So it's really like when they're like, oh, we don't like morenos, like, oh, that's what we are. So, and I think that does come from like the standard of beauty, though, of like, especially for Latinx folks, like in Brazil, like the standard of beauty is, you know, same as here, blonde eyes or blue eyes, blonde hair. And I think that that takes away from what we think is beautiful. So I think part of that turns into like my family saying, hey, we're not Black, we're just, I don't know, we're light skinned. Like if that, like that sounds, that makes sense. But I think it's important to talk about this in leadership, because nobody talked about this when I was growing up, so I kind of felt invisible. So it's like refreshing to hear your stories, because I thought it was something so specific to me. And even as a student, it's like, I feel like I never really belonged anywhere, because even in Brazil, I'd be American. My mom's family, I'd be Black, and my dad's family, I'd be white. And here, I'm Brazilian, right? And then for kids, like I'm either a Black kid or I'm a Latino kid. So it's like everywhere I go with the people, depends on who surrounds me. I feel like my identity changes, because that's what people are labeling me as. And so it's important to be aware of these things, because like you said with the box, like you can't just put everybody in the box. And being Black is a spectrum, and I think that's just something that we need to talk about more in leadership. Because yeah, I mean, Black kids go through identity struggles all the time because they don't fit the traditional Blackness.
No, yeah, that idea of colorism, and I think our grandparents are probably around the same ages, because my grandma is, I'm always trying to school her and tell her different things about, hey, this is kind of what the line is now. Because it gives me something as simple as, I'll give you guys more a personal example of outside during the summer where my skin gets a little bit on the darker side. Outside, I'm not tanning per se, but I'm, enjoying the sun. And some, and she's always like, oh, don't sit out in the sun too long, it'll get too dark. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? She's like, oh, put some sunscreen on, put a hat on, you don't want to get too dark. And for me, like, sometimes I'm like, all right, I can't, like, go back at this lady, like, she's my grandma, but at the same time, sometimes I'm like, that's offensive. Like, my mom's now husband and also my grandfather, they're way darker than I am. Like, they pass for just being just Black, but they're from Rotan, which is the island closer to Belize and Honduras that was colonized first. So they're English speaking, but they're all dark skinned. So for me, sometimes I'm like, well, my siblings are darker than I am. So can they be in the sun? Like where do we draw the line? And where do we like learn to have those conversations? But that's just a personal example. But bringing it back to leadership, I think that it's just going back to the basics of everyone needs to be represented. If I'm working at a company or a school or wherever I might be, a hospital, and I'm looking at, trying to expand and kind of go up in the ranks, and I don't see myself as being represented anywhere, I'm not gonna wanna go there. I'm gonna want to go somewhere else where I feel like that is represented there, and I feel like I can do this. You know what I mean? Not having to constantly just work somewhere that's kind of like D&I, but it's like, what does DE and I mean for this organization and for this kind of way that we're trying to live throughout the world? Because I think that, everybody has something to do. So it's just being able, I think, in leadership, being able to say, hey, no one here looks like me, I'm out. Or being able to be that person that kind of takes it a step further and asks for why as well. So.
My reflections of the video, I think my experience is a little bit different because I am conscious that I actually do have a choice. If I don't say anything, if I just let my hair fall flat, I will just be Latina. Like, no one will code me as Black. I won't have that experience. And so it's interesting to wake up every day and choose that, because there's a lot of, that is privilege inherently. And also there, for me, is a beauty in having that relationship with my identity where I'm finally coming to a point in my life that, yes, I understand how people are going to see me, but it's not impacting as much the way I see myself. And I think that took a long time, and that took a lot of mess ups and being in the wrong space and being lost in my own body. I think that the video also reminds me that we are constantly identity policing one another. We gatekeep one another. The same person who's telling you you're not Latina enough or whatever has their own reasons why they think they're not enough as well. And that's something I would love to just abolish. Let's just stop. I think from a leadership perspective, again, if I even broaden Afro-Latinidad to this, again, spectrum of what is Black, we are in a time right now where we see how we have this huge anti-racist movement that is largely co-opted by whiteness, that largely centers their experience and their coming into understanding about Blackness. And I think our responsibility, even for Latina people who are not of color per se, but who are still, even as white folks, can be racialized in those bodies, right? The minute they talk with their accent, I think it's the responsibility of us and people of color to really think about this as an opportunity to set the tone for where we're going next. The same way they've established it's not enough to be not racist, so we're gonna push to anti-racist. It's the same way we can say it's not enough to say anti-Blackness is wrong. What does it look like for us to establish a tone where we are pro-Black now? And what does that look like? And what does that look like for us on an individual level and as a community? Is it stepping aside? Is it creating space? Is it elevating the voices? Is it letting folks who have that experience lead the conversation for a change? So I think there's a really beautiful opportunity in leadership and this identity to do that and be that in a way that we really haven't had the opportunity prior. So I think that's my biggest thing. It's like, how do we shift to a pro-Black space? And not just pro-Black, right? Like I'm talking all the margins, like pro-Black, pro-queer, all of it. But starting from that place and acknowledging that a rising tide lifts all boats, I think that's where we can move in the future.
Thank you guys for your feedback. I can say from my experience watching this video, I can like relate with a lot of those moments, like how Ari talked about her grandmother. I have my great aunt, and every time I get on the phone with her, she goes, "Mommy, I need you to improve your race." And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "You need to marry somebody lighter." Because like it is just like sad because my mom's side is more Cuban and her grandmother is Italian. So it's like everyone's completely different than me, my mom, and my sister, because my grandma is the darker shade tone, and one of her sisters, her twin, is actually darker than her. So they call us the Black ladies, from Noir. In our culture, means the Black ones. So when I go to France and I see everyone, I'm like, "Oh, that's my family, y'all." And I take pictures. People's like, "That's your cousin?" I'm like, "That's mine. I'm gonna stick by her." So those moments like that, and then watching a video and explaining to my family that who don't have to walk in our shoes to like, "Hey, this is how you're making me feel, and this is how you're making other people feel." Or with my niece is like, she's my little baby, that's my little princess, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, you're so brave for a Black girl." And I'm like, you can't say things like that to her. So those like are triggers, I would say, watching that video. I'm like, wow, okay, I'm not the only one who's challenging and going through that. And when it comes to leadership roles, I feel like in the position that I am, that's the first time I'm like, oh, like I love seeing myself in these roles because I get to see it through other people's eyes, how happy they are. Mostly first year students coming in and then finding our office. And you're like, oh my God, there's people like us. Because, for example, like Brian is my next door neighbor. You're not supposed to be friends with kids, it's just close Brian. We're rivals. I'm from Malden, he's from Everett. And we come from a community where we are not the majoritized, but minority. We are the major. Like my high schools, we had 7 languages they were teaching us, and all these teachers are from these cultures. Most of my grades, I had Black professors and Black teachers, and then I came to Regis College, and I was like, where everybody at? I was like, where's my people? So it was very culture shocking. And when our Center for Inclusive Excellence was created, I was so excited, always trying to visit. At that time, I was Kirkley assistant, so we were working on the project together, doing first gen breakfasts with brothers. The only person I think during the time when me and Ari was going here was, I can think of, was Professor Jackson and Erica.
He was my first Black professor.
Yeah.
In graduate school.
Those are the only 2 person. I was always in their office, and that's how me and Ari became friends, because she was the grad intern at that time. Because I can relate to her, and she can relate to me. It was like amazing. And I think that's why we need those bonds, because that's the first time I learned about grad internship was through outreach. Like, you can get your free masters. I was like, oh, free masters. I was like, when do I sign up? So I think that's why I feel like in higher education and education itself, we need more people of color, more queer, and where students can relate and have that bond with someone. Because right now, my niece, she goes to a school where she doesn't talk to anyone that much. Her only person she talked to is a grade below her, so they only talk during recess. It's because I'm like, oh, who's your friend, Sophie? Why? Because she looks like me. Like, she will say things like that, and it just makes me sad to think like that's the only person she feels like she feels comfortable to talk to. So the next question I have for you guys is, how can someone be an ally in the community?
Speaking up, that's it. I think over the years, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I was in spaces where I felt shy to speak up, or like I was gonna be singled out if I was the one speaking up, or whatever that might be. But I think over the last couple of years, probably my last year at Regis, honestly, my last year doing my grad degree, I had a boss, her name's Erica. You guys probably know her. Erica Devine. She's Caribbean. And so I started to understand, Audrey. I started to understand, like I started to ask I never cared to really ask my parents, like, hey, like, what's your story? Like, my mom wasn't born here. She was actually born in Honduras and then came to New York and then went to New Orleans and has like a full story. But I think that hearing her, how she talked about Cape Verde and how her family got here and her mom, and just like her entire story just made me be like, oh, I don't know my family story, and I'm out here repping that I'm half Spanish and I'm half Black and I don't even know my story. I can't tell it. So I think I've been able to get more comfortable with just asking questions, speaking up. If I feel like, you know, there's something that, you know, doesn't sound right, or even with my own family, I'm like, I don't like how that sounds. Like you telling me, my grandma, that I can't be outside because I'm gonna get too dark. I don't like that. It comes off rude and it's not right. It's giving racist. So I think just for me, I think being able to speak up, I've always been like a shy individual when it comes to like speaking up and, you know, kind of being there for myself. I've been horrible at it, but I've gotten better the last couple of years. But just to answer the question, go back to it, speak up, be there.
I think I have like a weird relationship with ally because I'm like, I don't like using ally as a noun. I think of it as this like ongoing action. So typically when I'm talking about it, I'm like, I practice allyship by X, Y, and Z. And I think, yes, the speaking up is important. I think the listening piece is important. I find that more recently with the particular situation I dealt with at work, that sometimes we wait for the communities who are on the receiving end of harm to come up with the solutions. We're like, okay, just what do you need? I support you. What do you need? And I think we can't always rely on the communities who have been harmed to come up with solutions to problems they didn't create. So what does it look like to come up with that solution yourself of like, so I noticed that, you know, X, Y, and Z is always happening. Here's what I'm thinking to change that behavior. What do you think? Is there something I'm missing? Like, would this be helpful to you? I find like coming to the community with ideas, that builds capacity for the work. And when you're in the spaces, like, I don't know, sometimes I think I'm gonna be the Trojan horse because they're gonna be like, oh, not that one. And then I'm coming in like, you're the Black people, what are you doing? That's problematic. But I think when you have access to spaces that you know those target populations do not have access to, that is when you elevate that. And you don't wait, right, for the first person who has that identity to come into that space to then speak up about it. You make that space ready for that person to come into. And I think we have to start challenging ourselves to do that, even if it means you're educating yourself, even if it means there's the potential to do it wrong. I think we have to start like really leaning into that. And that's everything from the classroom, the workspace, to just checking well on the phone. Like all of it.
Yeah.
Like, why are you telling this cousin to do that? You don't tell me to do that.
Right.
The little things. Mess up your whole Thanksgiving dinner.
I think the speaking up piece is real, especially I really like what you said about like, why is it up to us to create solutions to problems we didn't create? I think that's so real. And also, it's just like, it isn't enough just to post stuff on your social media. It isn't enough to take a picture of you at a, it isn't enough for you to take a picture at like a Black Lives Matter protest and be like, hey, I'm an ally. Like, no, you need more than that. And also, with the speaking up thing, like, it's not a privilege that I as a Black man have to do. Like, I can't like walk up to some white dude and be like, hey, what you did earlier really hurt me. Like, just that's not something I can do. So I think also helping people speak up, I think is a real thing, because sometimes when Black people try to speak up, it becomes a safety issue. But also, I think to be an ally is just stop dividing us amongst ourselves, because I think the divide, yes, comes internally, but also like externally. Because, you know, at the end of the day, like if I get like these buzzwords of like aggressive, it's going to be pointed to me if I try to speak my mind, just like if a Haitian male tries to speak his mind, because we're both Black. So I don't think that it's helpful to divide us against each other, to kind of just like, you know, to be an ally, just to understand that like Black is a spectrum. All these things are a spectrum, and Black is different.
I want to elevate one thing you said so we can be real specific about it too. It's not speaking up like, that's offensive to Brian, what you said. It's not like you can't say that. It's more of like I'm offended that you're portraying this identity in a really narrow way, right? You have to take ownership of it. Like, you can't be like, oh, yes. Like, you have to say, like, I'm offended.
Yeah, I think that's real, because it's like certain times that like people are speaking up for me. They're like, hey, you made him really uncomfortable rather than like.
Uncomfortable.
Right, rather than like, you said this and this was the issue, like, because I feel like sometimes you frame it and it's like the issue is that I'm uncomfortable, so let's fix that, not like, let's fix what you said. Which is real, but you can, like, I think with a lot of these things you can understand just by talking to Black people. Like, you
Asking
can't,
those extra questions.
Right.
Just taking those few extra minutes, not just like, hey, okay, yeah, oh, sorry, that's okay. Let's go. You know what I mean?
Find the stories.
Yeah.
too. There's so many people who are willing to tell your story. You don't have to go up to the only Black person you
Right,
know and be
right.
like, what you're about. And like there are people who are, I think of all the Black trans women I see on Instagram who are like, this is my story in your face. You don't even have to ask them. Just like do the Instagrams full. And that's a lot. That's
and like, people try to be an ally for things that they don't understand. Like, are you gonna defend me and like what I stand for if you don't even know what the term Afro-Latinx means?
Right. It's not always our job to explain that.
Yeah.
Do the work, and hey, if you got extra questions, I know, you know what I mean? Because I think that for me, and like where I kind of work, that for me is what gets me like on a day to day. I'm like, I'm not always having to explain these things to y'all. Like, go look on Google, like, or do something. Like, don't come to me with the empty plate. Come to me with a plate that's half full, and I'll come to you with the other half, and we can compromise, you know what I mean? And have these open, honest conversations where I can come into that space, being an ally for my people and all the things that we kind of have to go through, so.
And I like what you said about ally not being
Mhm.
because I feel like with the ally term, people kind of just start listing off credentials of why they're not racist.
Yes.
You're like, oh, but I did this. Oh, look at this PowerPoint. Like, I'm like, okay, but like, I don't.
And then you're like, have you ever talked to a Black person in your life? And you're like,
So I hate that. I feel like people almost want to put ally on the resume because they think it's like something that can be achieved because you did this one thing, when it's just like a journey. Like, it's something that you always have to work on. And if you kind of state that you're an ally because you want people to like, hey, hi, I'm Brian, I'm an ally. Like, you're not really an ally because then you're making it about yourself, which I think a lot of people kind of miss the point.
I think it's also good to say, like, it's okay to make mistakes. I have seen allies that make the little mistakes and they're like crying and they're doing all these things. And like, it's okay to make a little mistake, but it's your action after the mistake that matters. And I think when we talk about ally, we also need to talk about that chapter, because we're not going to get it right all the time, every single day of our lives. But any other questions, or anyone in the audience have a question? That was a lot.
Yeah, besides, so what are some of the benefits from your identity, like some of the superpowers besides being fine? Like, I mean, right? You talk a lot, you touched upon this a little bit, but like, what makes it your superpower?
I know for me, because of the line of work I am now in, I really appreciate how I exist in a very in-between space, and I can use that because I choose to build bridges between other people. So there are times where I do relate to a population that would even surprise me, like where I find things that I have in common with someone. But I think that comes from like what they're now calling DEI training. I was calling like, oh, that's the family reunion. Like we worked across different cultures and races and ethnicities. So I feel like that's been a really good like superpower for me of like, I know how to bring people together. I can connect different people. When I throw a party and all my friends come, they're gonna be different. We're all gonna be like, it's gonna be a truly diverse group and it's gonna be a good time. So I've really been trying to remind myself of that and lean into that. And the fact that it keeps me, I think, being naturally inquisitive in a time where everyone is so afraid of the unknown or afraid to be wrong. I think that my constant curiosity and ability to understand that my identity is so dynamic has been very liberating, because today this is how I feel and this fits me. The language might change next week or 5 years from now, but it's still mine. And so that ownership, that reflexivity, that bridge building, those all feel like assets, especially when I'm in situations where I'm like, oh man, I gotta teach you how to do this. Okay, well, here we go. So I think that's for me.
No, it's a little tough one. I need more time to think. Brian, you know you can do it.
I think so. I think like my superpower in a sense would be like self-awareness.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that like on paper, like I'm even looking at it right now, like Afro-Latinx, like my identity has a hyphen in it, showing like two things. I think being aware of that because it's like I can use like my Blackness to support Black people, and also I can use like my Latino identity to support like Latinos or folks with Latinx heritage. And I think understanding that and like with the identities, with like being mixed and like that intersectionality, I think there's also a lot of empathy there because like being Black, there's an oppression there, and then being Latino, there's more oppression there. And I think it's kind of got me to a point where like I just see oppression as oppression, because part of me can identify with like anybody who's being oppressed because I've been that all my life. And at the end of the day, suffering is suffering. And when you start comparing sufferings, like that's really when the problem begins. But I think if you can identify that like some person is suffering because of like their gender identity, even though I've never dealt with that, I have suffered because of like my racial identity. And at the end of the day, I can still point that like, okay, we're both suffering because of like who we are. And I think that's like being self-aware and empathy that comes with my identity. Because if I was just like this white male, I don't think I ever would be walking around all day like I'm a white man, but I'm walking around all day like, yeah, I'm a Black dude because I have to be self-aware. I have to understand how people are going to feel when I walk into a room. I have to understand, especially being in leadership positions, being like an orientation leader, like there's no way I can't be self-aware because I have to already like almost predict how Black kids are going to see me, like that breath of fresh air. So self-awareness is a big one.
Yeah, no, those were great. I think I'm still kind of putting together a bunch of things, but I think for me, it's just being able to be authentic wherever it is that I am, whatever space I walk into, whether that's like the gym, a party, a corporate setting, a higher education setting, wherever that is. I think being able to bring like two backgrounds into one and really show up as myself in that space, I think it's just a superpower. And then I would also say, this is more on the fun side, just the food that both of my co-workers bring in. That is a superpower because let me tell you, the events and the holidays and all that stuff, I just are proud. Where some people are like, oh, Thanksgiving at my house. I'm like, you can come to my house. You can get some Black Southern food, or you can get some Hispanic food, you know, get a little bit of both. I think I'm just the authenticity of just everything that my two cultures kind of bring in together. I'm really proud of. So.
I think for me is I'm from two different cultures, two different backgrounds, and it's the most beautiful thing because I think it defines who I am. When I wake up in the morning, it just makes me who I am. I guess the best way is like I can wake up and feel like, oh, well, I'll listen to my Latino music and I'll be all like hyper. Or I can change my playlist to a Haitian playlist, or I can do soca. There's so many. I think it's so many things comes with being from the Caribbean and being West Indies, and I think is what I'm very proud for. And then when I walk in and I see the students and connecting with them, and we all from different backgrounds, different faiths, and it's just like a great bond, like a melting pot, yeah.
Yes, thank you all for this. This is amazing. But I'm curious, what would you have to say to either your younger self or someone who is young and having to deal with things that you all dealt with? What would you say as like word of advice or encouragement to allow them to be who they truly are?
Wear that curly hair.
Yeah.
Don't straighten me. Don't get those relaxers. You're gonna regret it when you're 27 years old. And just be you and be free and be happy to be there in those spaces and have emotional love. But yeah, just be proud.
Yeah, I mean, going off of that, like to me specifically, I'd be like, yo, don't shave your head, like because everybody wants curly hair. But also, I wish I could tell my younger self not to try to prove to people like my identity. Like being comfortable enough to be like, hey, I know I'm Black, I know I'm Brazilian, I don't have to walk around with like the Constitution, you know what I mean, or something like that, to be like, hey, no, I'm Black, and here's a picture of my dad, and here's a picture of his dad. And no, like, I've wasted so much energy trying to prove that to people. And so I guess that's my advice for kids who also fit the description. Just, I mean, as long as you know who you are, like, that's who you are. Don't let the world kind of tell you who you are, because, you know, as we've all shared, like, people will tell you different things, and at the end of the day, you're gonna have an identity crisis, which I've had so many times, because instead of searching who I am within myself, I'm searching who I am with other people. But that changes with a group of people. That changes if I'm around white people, I'm Black. If I'm around Black people, then I'm not so Black. If we're around Brazilians, I'm American. And I just wish I took more time to kind of just like, who am I first, rather than like go off of what other people think.
Man, yeah, I should write that book.
Right?
I think number one, the Constitution. The second thing I would have probably told myself is like not to worry, that this is a journey, that you can claim, unclaim, reclaim any of it at any time, and that's totally within your control. Whatever part of your identity that you feel like you haven't accessed yet or don't know enough about, it's always going to be there within your reach. You just have to be okay with knowing, maybe not right now, but one day I'm gonna get in there and it's gonna be okay. And then I think the biggest one over and over again is I would tell myself that you're enough. You're enough of both, you're enough of all. Your part of your Haitian experience is being Puerto Rican, and part of your Puerto Rican experience is being Haitian, and you cannot untangle those two things, and don't let anyone try.
For me, I would tell my younger self, take up space. You better shine. And also, it's okay to wear your Afro puff for your cheering competition. You do not need that permit. You do not need to scream. So thank you guys for coming. They will be around if you want to say hi to them. And yay.